Why avoidants bond slowly but attach intensely? Why do avoidants take so long, sometimes painfully long, to bond, yet when they finally do, their attachment becomes far deeper and stronger than anyone expects? What slows them down? What holds them back emotionally? And what makes their attachment so intense once it finally forms? Understanding this behavior isn't easy. On the surface, avoidants often look cold, distant and uninterested. But if you understand what's happening inside them, the picture becomes completely different. An avoidant's emotional world doesn't show on the outside, but internally they are deeply sensitive, deeply reactive, and deeply attached. They just don't reveal it right away. Their bonding is slow not because they don't care. Their bonding is slow because they are afraid of caring. The bonding process for an avoidant is always complicated, layered, and heavily controlled. They take every step with hesitation. They take time to build trust. They take time to feel emotionally safe, and revealing their inner emotional world, that takes them even longer. For avoidance, relationships automatically mean vulnerability, and vulnerability has always felt like a threat. But this is only the first part of the story. Slow bonding is just the beginning, because once an avoidant finally crosses that inner barrier, once they relax their emotional defenses, once they allow themselves to feel what they've been pushing down for so long, their attachment becomes intense. They get deeply invested without openly expressing it. They care silently. They become quietly loyal, and the depth of their emotions shows up not in their words, but in their reactions, their behaviors, and their subtle shifts. Avoidants bond slowly, but when they attach more strongly and more deeply than most people. The connection becomes an emotional anchor for them. It becomes something they can't easily detach from, even if they never admit it out loud. And this entire phenomenon is what we're going to break down in this video. First, we'll discuss the reasons why their bonding process is so slow. Then we'll explore why their attachment becomes so intense once the bond is formed. If you truly want to understand avoidance on a deeper psychological level, make sure you watch this video until the end. And if this breakdown helps you, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. The first reason avoidants bond slowly is very simple yet deeply rooted. They take a long time to open up emotionally. This is not because they lack feelings or because they don't care. It's because emotional closeness triggers an old internal defense system that tells them to stay guarded. For an avoidant, opening up isn't automatic. It's a process that requires careful pacing, evaluation, and a sense of absolute emotional safety. Where most people see connection as a natural part of getting to know someone, avoidants experience it differently. The moment emotional intimacy begins to grow, they become hyper-aware. Their inner system starts scanning for risk. Is this safe? Should I share this? Will this make me vulnerable? Can this be used against me? This internal questioning slows down their ability to reveal their deeper selves. Because of this, their bonding process becomes a cycle. They observe a case, test, step back, observe again, come near, then pause, then re-engage. This internal rhythm is not manipulation, it's emotional survival. It's how they maintain control over their inner world. When avoidants finally begin to trust someone, the shift is subtle. You won't see dramatic emotional revelations or sudden confessions. Instead, they open up in small increments. Maybe they start answering questions with a bit more detail. Maybe they share a small memory. Maybe they let you be a part of their routine. These small acts are actually huge indicators of trust for them. Another major factor behind their slow emotional pace is overstimulation. Even basic intimacy, being asked personal questions, receiving affection or having deeper conversations, can overwhelm them quickly. When someone gets close emotionally, avoidants feel a tightening inside, like their boundaries are being crossed, even if nothing intense is happening. So they regulate closeness by slowing down. They take breaks. They create emotional space. They manage the connection so it doesn't feel too heavy. This leads to another layer, internal contradiction. Avoidants want connection more than they admit. They want to feel understood, valued and emotionally safe, but at the same time they fear losing control, depending on someone, or being vulnerable. This conflict becomes a quiet tug of war inside them. One part of them leans in, the other part retreats. This inner clash is why they share selectively and cautiously, and when they do open up, even a little, it carries tremendous meaning. If they share a fear, a childhood memory, a vulnerability, or something they usually hide, it means they trust you on a level they rarely allow themselves to reach with anyone. It shows that your presence softens their defenses. So yes, avoidance bonds slowly because opening up is not just a step, it's a risk they calculate every time. Their slow pace is their version of emotional self-protection. It isn't about lack of interest, it's about making sure they don't step into emotional territory they're not ready for yet. And when they finally do let someone in, it's one of the strongest signs that the bond is becoming real, steady, deep and sincere, even if it unfolds quietly. The second reason avoidance bonds slowly is that they operate through a constant internal push-pull rhythm, a pattern where emotional closeness draws them in briefly, but simultaneously activates their need for distance. This internal cycle creates hesitation, inconsistency, and delay in how they form deeper bonds. Avoidants aren't unpredictable on purpose, their behavior reflects a silent struggle inside them. When someone gets close emotionally, it awakens a part of them that longs for connection, a part that wants to feel seen and valued. But almost immediately, another part inside them reacts with discomfort. That second part fears emotional dependence, fears losing autonomy, and fears the unpredictability that comes with intimacy. These two sides collide within seconds. This is why their bonding process becomes a cycle of approach, withdraw, return, disengage, reapproach. It is not a game, it is a psychological defense mechanism shaped by their past experiences. When closeness grows, they instinctively take a step back to regain emotional control. When distance settles in, they feel calmer and come closer again. This back-and-forth dynamic significantly slows the pace of connection. When avoidants sense emotional warmth, it feels unfamiliar. A part of them enjoys it, but another part interprets it as pressure. That pressure activates their self-protective habits, creating space, limiting emotional depth, or suddenly becoming reserved. They may appear inconsistent because their emotional system is constantly shifting between two needs: closeness and safety. Distance for an avoidant is not rejection, it is their emotional reset button. The moment intimacy feels too intense or vulnerable, they instinctively create space to restore balance. This can look like shorter conversations, abrupt changes in tone, withdrawing into work or routine, or becoming quiet without explanation. These changes confuse others, but inside the avoidant, it is a necessary step to calm the internal alarm that closeness triggers. Then once they feel regulated again, they reapproach in small ways. Maybe they send a message, initiate a light conversation, share a thought, or show subtle attention. This return is genuine, a sign that they do feel the connection, but on their terms. Yet as soon as the emotional closeness intensifies again, the pull-back instinct repeats. This pattern slows emotional development drastically. Where most people steadily move forward in a relationship, avoidants move in a zigzag pattern. Their bonding progresses in micro-movements rather than clear steps. Each time they pull back, they pause the bonding process. Each time they return, they restart it. This cycle makes emotional advancement slow, cautious and gradual. But here's what many people misunderstand. The push-pull isn't a lack of interest, it's a sign of internal conflict. If they didn't care at all, The third reason is comfort first, commitment later. The avoidance bonding model is built on a single foundation: emotional comfort. Until their internal system feels at ease, their mind does not allow any deeper attachment. They treat relationships like a slow warming process. Warmth arrives, but gradually, carefully, and at their own internal pace. For avoidance, connection is not about sudden sparks, it's a gradual acclimation. First they observe the environment, then they test the situation. Next they monitor their emotional responses, and only much later, when their internal alarm system settles, do they allow a small degree of closeness. It's important to understand this stage because for avoidance, the sequence of comfort-commitment never reverses. If they feel tension, unpredictability, or emotional pressure in a relationship, bonding immediately slows down, even if the connection is strong. Avoidants naturally keep their vulnerability tightly guarded. Their mind repeatedly reminds them ensure the environment is safe first, then access feelings. It's similar to someone who doesn't jump straight into a cold pool. They first test the water with their feet, gradually get comfortable, and only then fully immerse themselves. Emotional closeness follows the exact same pattern for them. Comfort for them means their pace is respected, their individuality remains intact, their boundaries are freely maintained, and you are emotionally predictable. All these elements create a psychological signal within them. You're safe enough to move toward. Commitment for them is not a reward but earned relaxation. When their nervous system is calm, they naturally participate more in the relationship. They don't rush this stage. Forced intimacy feels uncomfortable, even threatening. This is why they prioritize harmony over rapid closeness. If they sense even a slight compromise of space or compression of their individuality, they immediately slow down bonding. They're not pulling away, they're simply trying to internally stabilize. This slow bonding phase is a survival-style mechanism. Avoidants do not avoid commitment, they avoid premature commitment. It is crucial for them that the relationship syncs with their internal rhythm, otherwise their emotional system becomes overloaded. When an avoidant senses that you understand their emotional tempo, their system relaxes. They naturally soften, become more consistent, and find it easier to express their feelings. This transformation happens not through pressure, but through permission and patience. Here their slow pace is not a flaw, it is their bonding architecture. Once comfort is established, commitment blooms, and when that stage arrives, avoidants become surprisingly loyal, deeply feeling, and invested partners. The fourth reason of their slow bonding is fear of vulnerability and rejection. Avoidants often approach relationships with caution because they carry a deep-seated fear of being emotionally exposed. This fear is not just about discomfort, it's rooted in past experiences, learned patterns and internalized belief that showing too much of themselves could lead to hurt. For them, vulnerability is risky territory. It opens doors to possible rejection, disappointment, or perceived weakness. This fear influences every stage of their emotional engagement. When someone approaches them with warmth or closeness, their internal alarm system is triggered. They may feel a surge of anxiety, subtle tension in the body, or an instinctive urge to create distance. This isn't about a lack of interest, it's about self-protection. They have learned that shielding themselves from emotional exposure keeps them safe, and they apply this principle rigorously in bonding. Avoidants often analyze and overthink interactions before allowing themselves to respond authentically. They ask themselves, if I show my feelings, will they judge me? Will they expect more than I can give? Am I risking emotional pain by letting them in? These internal questions slow down the process of building closeness, because every step forward involves negotiating with fear. Another aspect of this fear is the unpredictability of human connection. Avoidants crave stability and predictability, but vulnerability inherently involves uncertainty. By gradually opening up and testing emotional waters slowly, they can monitor reactions, gauge safety, and protect themselves from potential rejection. This is why even small displays of intimacy, like sharing a personal story or expressing emotions, are deliberate and measured. They are calculated risks taken only when the environment feels secure enough. This fear also makes avoidants highly sensitive to cues of judgment or criticism. Even minor perceived slights can trigger a defensive response, making them pull back and reassess the emotional risk. The cycle repeats itself. They approach, test, retreat, and then re-engage cautiously. Over time, this pattern builds a slow but deliberate pathway toward bonding, as they incrementally overcome the fear that has controlled their interactions for years. It's important to recognize that this fear doesn't prevent avoidants from forming deep connections. Rather, it ensures that when they do attach, the bond is meaningful and intentional. They invest emotionally only when they feel assured that vulnerability will not be met with harm. This approach results in relationships that, once established, are incredibly loyal, attentive, and deeply committed. In summary, the fourth reason for slow bonding is the avoidant's profound fear of vulnerability and rejection. This fear dictates the pace at which they allow closeness, ensuring that every step forward is carefully weighed. While it may seem like hesitation or distance, it is actually a protective strategy that, once navigated successfully, paves the way for intense, authentic attachment. The fifth reason of their slow bonding is deep emotional processing before full investment. Avoidants rarely rush into emotional commitment. For them, bonding is not a spontaneous leap, but a carefully calibrated process that requires deep internal evaluation. Before they can fully invest in a relationship, they meticulously process their feelings, the dynamics with the other person, and the potential impact on their emotional equilibrium. This internal review ensures that they maintain a sense of safety while exploring intimacy. This deep emotional processing is a survival mechanism. Avoidants have often experienced situations where vulnerability led to hurt, disappointment, or conflict. Over time, they've learned to pause and evaluate emotional situations thoroughly before responding. Every thought, action, and feeling is filtered through this inner review system. They ask themselves questions like, do I feel safe expressing this? How will this affect my boundaries? Is this person trustworthy enough for me to reveal my true self? These internal deliberations slow the pace of bonding but ultimately protect their emotional well-being. Their internal dialogue often revolves around assessing risks and rewards. Avoidants are highly aware of their own emotional triggers and limitations. They consciously and unconsciously monitor the other person's reactions, body language, and consistency. By doing this, they create a mental map of the relationship's stability and potential. Only when the map shows a safe path do they allow themselves to invest more deeply. This cautious approach ensures that when avoidants do engage fully, their attachment is intentional, measured, and sustainable. Another reason this processing takes time is that avoidants prioritize emotional self-regulation. They are sensitive to overstimulation and can quickly feel overwhelmed by intimacy. Rapid emotional involvement can trigger anxiety, discomfort, or withdrawal. By processing internally first, they calibrate their emotional response, gradually expanding their capacity for closeness without becoming overextended. This is why their slow bonding is not a sign of indifference. It is a deliberate effort to integrate their feelings with a manageable sense of security. Avoidants also use this period to evaluate compatibility and alignment. They consider how their emotional needs, boundaries, and values fit with the other person's behavior. They reflect on patterns of communication, consistency, and trustworthiness. By engaging in this deep emotional analysis, they ensure that any future investment is based on confidence rather than impulsivity. This careful assessment protects them from entering situations that might compromise their sense of autonomy or safety. Ultimately, this processing leads to profound and intense attachment once the avoidant feels assured. When they finally invest, it is not superficial or fleeting. Their commitment is informed, deliberate, and resilient. They may still maintain some personal space and boundaries, but their emotional involvement becomes genuine, sustained, and often more profound than that of partners who bond quickly without such careful reflection. In summary, the fifth reason avoidants bond slowly is their need for deep emotional processing before full investment. This deliberate internal evaluation safeguards their emotional stability, ensures alignment with the other person, and allows them to enter relationships fully prepared. Once this process is complete, the bond they form is strong, lasting, and intensely committed, reflecting the careful thought and emotional energy they have invested in the journey. Despite their slow bonding, avoidance attachment patterns are quite unique and often surprising. In the beginning, their pace is slow, and this slowness is their natural way of safeguarding their emotions and boundaries. But for those who understand this process, a slow start is actually an indication that the attachment developing will be intensely deep and authentic. Slow bonding does not mean that an avoidant is uninterested or detached. It is their method of aligning their internal emotional system so that when they fully engage, their commitment and care are sustainable and resilient. When their pace is respected, they can freely express their emotions and the full depth of their attachment emerges. This intense attachment is a natural reward for their patience and the sync with their internal rhythm. Another important point is that in intense attachment, avoidants show loyalty, consistency, and emotional investment. This attachment is not superficial affection, it is a deeply rooted connection that can sustain long-term. When they feel safe, their care and concern become visible, from subtle gestures to consistent support. This intensity often surprises those close to them because at first, they appear reserved and distant. If you are in a relationship with an avoidant, the most important elements are patience and understanding. Trying to force their pace or demanding rapid closeness can overwhelm their system and disrupt the slow bonding process. However, when you respect their pace, honor their boundaries, and remain emotionally predictable and stable, you naturally unlock their capacity for intense attachment. The process from slow bonding to intense attachment is an emotional transformation. Gradually, their comfort level increases, and they begin to fully invest. At this stage, their loyalty, care, and commitment reach their peak. This attachment is authentic and sustainable, something that is often rare in typical relationships. In summary, slow bonding and intense attachment exist on a continuum, starting with patience and observation, and gradually moving toward depth and commitment. By respecting their pace, maintaining their space, and demonstrating consistent understanding, avoidance can offer a rare, loyal, and deeply fulfilling attachment. This pattern follows a psychological rhythm based on trust, security, and emotional authenticity. Always remember, slow bonding does not mean disengagement, and intense attachment does not mean sudden change. It is a carefully developed emotional journey that unfolds through respect, patience, and mutual understanding.